Welcome to today's video. We are making a wax ring. So I've carved this ring out of wax and we're gonna mold it into Delftclay and then clean up, and I'll show you how the whole process works. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while, and today is that day. So if this is something you might be interested in, stay tuned. It's gonna be a goodie. For today's video, you'll be needing a wax file, calipers, and some carving wax, and also don't forget your wax blades. Now these wax blades are special in the fact that they are twisted and quite coarse and very sharp. And the reason for the twist in the blade is so that it doesn't clog up when you're cutting through the carving wax. Very handy, because your normal blades will clog up within the first downstroke of cutting and your blade will just get stuck in the center of the wax, and then you'll struggle for at least 10 minutes to get it out of there. So do yourself a favor and get some wax blades. So firstly, what you want to do is mark out, or actually find out how wide you need your ring to be, and then you mark that measurement out on the wax cylinder. And in my case, I needed it to be about 18 millimeters because I'm making a wavy ring, and I need it to be the furthest end of the left wave up to the furthest point of the right wave to be about 18 millimeters across, although the center of the band would only be about 8 mils. And so yeah, that's what, hence the reason I needed quite a wide piece. And in this scene you can actually see how well those blades cut through the wax cylinder. It just makes life so much easier if you have the proper wax blade to cut with, and I'll find a link and pop it in the description if you're interested in getting some of those blades. Okay, so after you've cut through the cylinder, you want to make sure that your wax ring is nice and even, or parallel. The sides are all parallel, and because that'll affect your final product essentially. So you've got to make sure that everything is nice and straight and even, especially with this particular ring. It won't have a tapered base. It's going to be the same width all the way around, so I wanted to make sure that everything is nice and straight, otherwise it would throw off the waves in the final product. So the next step is crucial, if not the most important step in the project, is to make sure that you get the right size in the wax before you start carving. So in my case, I needed a size R1/2, which is quite a bit bigger than what the current wax ring is. When you purchase it, it is in a much smaller size, especially this particular wax cylinder that I have is more meant for ladies' rings, for smaller finger sizes, or gents' pinky rings. So it does, and I had to carve a lot out to actually get to the correct size, but luckily it's quite thick at the base, so it left me with enough metal or wax to work with for my project. But that is definitely something you shouldn't forget. I have forgotten in the past, and it's kind of like you go back to step one. if you forget that step. Now I've reached the maximum or the largest size I can go on my serrated ring mandrel, because those little shiny edges you see is actually little blades that shaves out the inside of the ring, and to keep the size and the ring on the inside consistent and nice and even. But there is a different one that I'm looking to purchase. It's more basic, but it actually, in my opinion, works better than this one. I will try and link that one in the description for you as well. So once you are happy with your ring size, you can go ahead and start filing and shaping your wax ring. So first off, I'll start with the outside and get the thickness all around the outside of the ring even. That's very important, and because I have started with essentially what's called a thinner wax cylinder, which wasn't ideal for this particular project, but it's all I had on hand, so you work with what you've got. So what you do is just file all the excess away before you start shaping the sides of the ring. So then at least you know you start with a evened thickness ring all the way around, and that is also very important, because you've got to keep in mind everything that you don't get rid of in the wax, you'll essentially have to file away in the metal. And in my opinion, filing wax is a lot easier and much more, well, what's the word I'm looking for? Much less wasteful, because we are casting this ring in gold, so you don't want to file all that gold away. So when you are happy with your thickness and your width and everything is nice and parallel and even, then you can start marking. So in my case, I wanted approximately 5 waves in the ring, or 5 bends. So I've divided up the outside diameter of the ring into 5 sections, and then started marking it across, marking the 5 sections first. Then I would mark each end to the width that I need, or the arc of the bend, if that makes sense. So if the wave, how far I want the wave to come in and the opposite end to push out. So I would have a nice even flowing ring, although I didn't want it to be exact even, but I did want it to be aesthetically pleasing, because this ring is supposed to represent how a river flows. So I'll get more into that a little bit later in the video. So now that I have the ring all marked up, I can proceed to file, and it's personal preference. You can either file everything out, or you can use your saw frame to cut along the line. Just make sure that you stay within, or just in this case outside of the line, to allow for any mistakes or slip-ups. And even if you do slip or mess up, you can just heat up some wax again and build up that section that you've messed up. The wax is very forgiving. It's not like working in metal where you have to be super accurate, or then have to melt metal to fill in a gap or a nick or a cut. With the wax, it's much easier to work with and a lot more forgiving. So after I've completed the one side, I would then either side, and originally I wanted to mark out both ends, both sides from the get-go, and then I realized it'd be way easier just to mark out the one side, and then after I've done that side and I'm happy with it, I can just use my vernier and follow along the filed edge to get a nice even mark on the opposite end. So I'll be 100% sure that everything flows nicely, and there wouldn't be any surprises or just a muck around and a waste of time to try and get everything even. So now that you got everything marked out and everything is as even as it's ever going to be, and like I said, mentioned earlier, I didn't want it to be perfectly even, but I wanted it to be aesthetically pleasing. So now just go ahead and file the profile of the ring, which is a nice half round profile. D shape for is another term for it. And I'll just go all around the ring, get everything nice and even, and once we've completed that, or this part of the ring, then it's time for the good bit. Then we'll get to the molding and delft casting bit, and I'll run you through that section step by step. So firstly, what you want to do is get your Delftclay casting out on a tray. I prefer this little metal baking tray. It just keeps everything neat and tidy. And what you want to do is get a metal ruler of some sort and just start chopping everything. Get rid of all those little lumpy bits, because that wouldn't be, you won't be able to mold the ring properly if you have all those lumpy bits. You've got to make sure that it's nice and fine and no clumpy bits, as fine as you can. I usually take a little bit of extra time just to get it all chopped up and as fine as possible. So now that you've got your Delftclay all nice and finely chopped up, it's time to start packing your mold. So you use the male end of the mold with the little rim section facing the place down onto the tray, which will be the center of the mold essentially. So make sure you hammer it, pack it so it's nice and tightly packed, as tight as possible. With us using wax as a mold, you kind of want to, you're gonna have to experiment with this, because you kind of want to get it nice and tightly packed, but not so tight that you can't press the wax mold into the clay. So yeah, it's gonna take a little bit of experimentation, but you'll kind of feel the texture and play around with it, and you'll get it in the end. Once you are happy with the way your Delftclay is packed, just take the ruler, scrape the excess off so it's nice and even and nice and smooth. And there you can actually see this will be the front bit where I'll be placing the mold, and so that's the next step. So now I've placed the mold, or the wax ring at least, into the clay, and what you want to do is get the ring about halfway into the clay, and I used a little coaster to apply pressure to the wax without smashing it, because you distribute the pressure quite evenly with the coaster. Yeah, so once you've done that, the next step is to place the negative end of the mold ring together and make sure those little lines are perfectly aligned, because that's going to help you when you, after you've packed the clay and remove the wax ring, to get it realigned. So be generous, and then before you start packing the Delftclay, apply some talcum powder I just use normal baby powder, and I'm fairly generous with my powder. I don't do it lightly. I just brush it ever so slightly, give it a quick blow, and to get rid of the excess powder, and then I place the molds together. So once you're happy with everything and everything is aligned, then you can start packing the second part of the mold. And once again, you want to pack that Delftclay fairly tightly. And the nice thing now, you've already got your wax ring placed in there, so you won't struggle to have to get it out. And once you've packed it, so you can pack it nice and firm. And just grab the hammer, make sure it's all nice and compact, and just carry on doing that until the Delftclay doesn't drop lower than the rim of the mold. Then it should be nice and firm. Now we are ready to separate the flasks, and that's, oh no, the flasks, the mold. So we've got a fairly good impression. The clay did break off ever so slightly on the edge there, but that's not a major problem. If the clay was pointing into the mold, that will be an issue. But if it's out, like in this case, it should be fine, because all you'll end up having is some excess metal into the protruding out from the ring, if you understand what I mean. And yes, it wouldn't be a problem. So just grab a nice tweezer, just loosen up the wax ever so slightly, very gently. I always do this, and then I'll place the wax back in a quick minute. I just wanted to make sure that everything has taken the right shape, but before I put it, because when I put it back in, then I'll make all my air grooves and my hole for the sprue and that sort of thing, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I'll just make sure that everything is nice and clean and there's no sand stuck in the grooves, because that's what could cause problems. So now I'm ready. I've cleaned up all the loose clay inside of the mold, and now I'm ready to place the ring back into the clay. And just make sure you place it back in exactly the same way you took it out, just to ensure that everything fits back in nice and tight. So the next step is, what I'll do is I'll start making air holes. I'll first make the hole for the sprue, and what I do is I keep the ring in place, and that keeps the clay from collapsing, and because the ring is there for resistance. And you just poke a little nice hole right up against the wax ring, all the way through the clay, and try and keep it as clean and tidy as possible. And just make sure the hole goes all the way through the clay, and it's big enough for the metal to flow into the hole to obviously meet up with the cavity that would be the ring. So I'll show you in a hot minute. So there you can see the hole all the way through, nice and large. And I open up the outside end with the back of my tweezers, just to get a bit of a conical shape going, because that'll be the receiving end of the metal. So that's where we're going to actually pour the metal into. So I take my time and I just carve some air holes just for the air to escape, and I also add a little air channel on the inside of the ring, just to allow for metal, if there's any excess metal, that it could potentially pass through that little center bit and meet up on the other end. But I just thought it can't hurt to add that little piece, and I've always done it that way, and I have a pretty good success rate with the Delftclay casting in getting it near perfect almost every time. So it's definitely, there must be some method in my madness, and so I would advise you to try it. Then lastly, before we finish up, at the very end of those air vents that you've created, the little channels, make sure you poke holes through it all the way through the other side of the clay, so it pops out the other end. That looks a bit messy, don't worry about that, that's all good. That won't affect your mold or your casting in any way. So just make sure the vents are nice and clear, no obstructions with clay, and then we're just very close to actually doing the physical cast. Now we are ready. Everything is done, all the holes are there, all the vents are, all the grooves are done. Ready to remove the wax for the final time. Just apply a little bit of pressure, try and get it out as evenly as possible, and shake loose any excess clay, and then we're ready to place the mold together. So just find those grooves, those markers on the end, and get them aligned, and then press your mold together. We should be golden. There we go, nice and tight. I just made a little arrow just to indicate which hole is the actual receptacle of the gold. So let's go cast. So now it's for the fun bit. So I've pre-melted the customer's metal into this bar just to check the color, and so now I'm about to melt all that and pour it into the clay. So what you want to do is get that metal nice and hot and flowy, that's a technical term, and once you think it's ready to pour, wait another 30 seconds, because you want a nice shiny surface on the metal after it's melted, and that'll give you a nice clean pour or clean casting at least, you know. So be patient with this step and get it right, because you don't want to start all over again. So once you're ready for the pour, get everything aligned, make sure that metal is nice and molten, and do a quick chuck, just a nice flow of the wrist, nice flick of the wrist, and get that metal in there as quick and evenly as possible. And don't worry about that flame or that scorched clay, we're going to get rid of that in the end anyway. Got my gloves on, let's open this puppy. Not too shabby, if I say so myself. Looks fairly good, a little bit crusty, but that's to be expected with clay. Is not super fine satin cast investment powder, it is clay after all. So all you do is dig it out a little bit, get the excess clay off, and then I'll dip it in ultrasonic cleaner just to get rid of that extra clay. But quite happy with the color. See how the gold actually flowed into all those air vents, and it went through the center part of that ring. And that's why I said it's always good to actually add all the air vents and all the extra bits to make sure that the metal flows freely. So all that's left to do now is get rid of all those little sprues and air vent bits that's stuck on the ring, and just cut it away with your jeweler's saw. With all the sprues cut away, it's time for filing, and this is what I meant back in the beginning of the video when we started out, filing in the wax. It's a lot easier in the wax than it is in the metal, but yeah, we do what needs to be done to get a good result, and that's all that's important in the end of the day. Is you want a good result, you want a product that the customer is happy with and you are happy with, and that's all that matters in the end. So after a lot of filing and a lot of sanding, we are now ready to put a shine on the ring. So just grab your polishing mop, a little bit of polishing compound, and start shining that puppy up. And then after we've done that, I will start setting some stones. And I didn't tell you about this in the beginning of the video, and this is for the folks that stuck around. So I'll be setting the client stones. She's got some rubies. She's got 5 rubies. Sorry, my apologies. 4 rubies and 1 diamond, 1 biggish diamond. And that's why I wanted the 5 curves, or the 5 waves as such, on the ring, because each stone will be set on a wave, and then I'll sprinkle all the small stones in between, and they'll all be shot set or gypsy set. I don't know whichever term you prefer, but they'll be sunk into the metal with no prongs that holds it in, just a metal rubbed over the stone. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to see quite clearly. I don't have one of those fancy cameras that can zoom right up into the stone or the setting, and so I'm hoping it's fairly clear. So the trick behind shot setting stones, especially semi-precious stones, what I mean by that is stones that are not diamonds. That's rubies, sapphires, garnets. Well, garnets not semi-precious, but anything that's not diamonds, that's prone to scratching, is first thing that I'll do, I would measure the stone. For argument's sake, say the stone is 3 millimeters in diameter. I would then find a corresponding ball burr to the equivalent size, and meaning by that is get a 3 millimeter ball burr, and then you, after you've drilled your hole, obviously you take your 3 millimeter ball burr and you burr into the metal, but only halfway, or just a smidge over halfway. And then what you find in the end is when you place the stone in the hole, it'll drop down just ever so slightly, because what you want is you want the girdle, that's the edge of the stone, the widest part of the stone, just to sit below the metal. And then I've made myself a little scribing or pushing tool, a rubbing tool out of a brass rod. So this is what a lot of people don't know, or other jewelers don't tell people learning the trade, is that a metal rubbing tool would scratch rubies, sapphires, and anything that's not a diamond. But if you use a little brass rubbing tool, it doesn't damage your stone, and it still applies enough pressure on the metal to rub it over the stones. So there's a little top tip for you. Hopefully that'll help you in your future endeavors in trying to set, or rub set at least, semi-precious stones. So all I'll do now is just carry on and measure each stone, and this was a bit of fun because each stone was a different size, so it's worthwhile having a bit of patience and just working through it to get everything perfect. So I finally got all the stones set. Now it's time just to get a final cleanup before we go to polishing. So just sandpaper the inside. For those of you who've watched my previous videos, you'll know about the sandpaper discs. I prefer using them. It gives me a nice finish, nice smooth finish on the ring, and I do use them on the inside and outside. I do obviously occasionally use the odd sandpaper drum, you know, those little round barrel ones, and but I do like my sandpaper discs, especially when they get a bit worn out. They leave the ring very nice and shiny. And then this one is the little brown radial wheel, just for cleaning up around those rubies and without scratching the stones. And the sandpaper also, just be wary if you're using fresh sandpaper, those will scratch your rubies as well. So just be careful. So I'm all happy with how the sanding went. It's now time to get the polishing mop out for the final time on this piece, and we'll polish the inside and get the outside nice and shiny. And it's always good practice to take your time with this bit, because a highly polished jewelry piece, I don't think there's anything that beats it. You know, if it's well polished and it's got a good shine on it, like a mirror finish, no scratches, no blemishes, just nice and clean and crisp and shiny, then you've done well. Even if you do have a few odd mistakes on the rest of the ring, if it's polished well, it's always impressive. Well, there you go. That brings us to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed watching the process of making this ring. I really enjoyed making it. It was really fun and something different and unique, and I hope you take something away from it. And all that's left to say is thanks for watching. I really appreciate all of you who subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.